Thank you. Hello everybody, as Roy said, my name's Colin Jones. I'm here to speak to you today about connecting agile processes with business strategy. It's not, I know it's a very amorphous title, it's not perhaps the most succinct at suggesting what I'm going to be speaking to you about this evening, but hopefully it conveys a message and you'll hopefully understand by the end of the talk what I'm talking about. So briefly, I'm going to be talking to you about who I am, what we're talking about, and why I'm talking to you this evening. I want to set some context to kind of cement some assumptions in your mind around what the last part, and then move on to the gap I perceive, having worked in Agile projects for a number of years, the impacts or the symptoms of that gap and the challenges that I face, and then what I think is the bridge of the gap in order to work better. So who, what, and why? So as Roy alluded to, I'm a technology consultant. I'm currently working part-time at Sky Betting and Gaming as a solution architect. Most of my background is in various different technologies, ranging from networking to security to applications, both Java, C#, and everything in between. But I have had detours into startups. My first detour was in 2005 when I tried to start up Just Eat, but didn't quite get there. So after a year, I went back to my employer, and probably 4 or 5 years later, I went into another startup to look at agile organizations. Now that startup wasn't centered around agile project delivery or software delivery. It was actually looking at local government processes, looking at it from a change management perspective. So I didn't have any of the thinking, which has obviously evolved over a number of years around agile delivery, which can be applied in those scopes. Whilst Roy said I was an expert at agile, I wouldn't consider myself to be an agile guru. I was here last month for John Terry's talk from LeanKit, which was kind of, he absolutely was so intimidating because he's got all the maths behind everything that he says. He was there at the campfire when they all kind of agreed the Agile Manifesto, and it's I'm not that guy. All I have done is worked in kind of tens of projects which use Agile to different degrees of success, and I've got some observations that I'd like to share with you. So I'm really hoping that you can help me in validating those things. So what I'm going to be talking about is, of course, we've seen it probably, agile done wrong equals misery. Expectations are set that aren't met. The business doesn't necessarily get on board with it. It's a buzzword. It hasn't been really thought through, hasn't been introduced to a business, but because everybody's talking about it, it must be possible. Agile done right, it still can end up in misery. You can have a completely working agile team, whatever methodology you choose to use, that is delivering features, which is their velocity is improving, things are all going well, and yet it doesn't necessarily integrate with the business very well. The business doesn't have confidence in the sort of flows which are occurring within in the agile team, and that specifically is what I want to talk to you this evening about. So why I want to talk to you is I'm going on another detour. My part-time work at Sky Betting and Gaming has allowed me to pursue another software service, which I've dubbed Neat. You can see the little website at the bottom there, getneat.io. It must be cool because it's got the .io domain name, so you can. It's got that rubber stamp. I'd really like to test the idea. I've spoken, you guys are obviously not the first people I've spoken to this. I've spoken to lots of friends and family, lots of colleagues, both past and present, about the idea, who all kind of reinforce the things that I'm seeing. They've all validated this gap, but I think this is probably the most expert group of people that I've shown the idea to. So I'm really, really interested in you guys and your opinions about the idea. Yeah, draw feedback from you guys. My slightly poorly scaled feedback. This is a form. If you guys have the opportunity to use it, I'd be really, really appreciative. There's 7 questions on there, 4 of which are multiple choice. So if you do have the opportunity, or you have any views that you don't have the opportunity to share with me this evening, there's the opportunity. It'll be back on the end of the talk. So, as I've indicated, I don't think I'm an Agile guru. I'm not here to refine any Agile processes. I think the way in which organizations choose to use Agile is, it's not fine, but it's there, it's well structured, and it's got a track record of success. I'm not even introducing additional methodologies that wrap, so I'm not looking at scaled Agile. I'm not looking to put wrappers around the processes such that they can be sit better within businesses. I'm just trying to develop the right behaviors within people who use Agile processes and provide perhaps a tool that will give them the nudges in order to do that. Sorry. So the gap. So as I alluded to, I think there's a gap between what Agile gives and what the business needs. Whenever Agile kind of goes in to a business, it's usually focused on a fairly targeted team structure. So it'll be more than likely an IT software project which is going into a particular area of the business, whether or not it's a finance system or maybe an e-commerce system. That delivery will be very focused on the end product rather than integrating the Agile process to the rest of the business. Businesses have been around now for hundreds of years, and there's a culture and an expectation set up between each of the departments around how they are run. And broadly speaking, the expectation is around a more waterfall-orientated delivery, whereby requirements and expectations are set. They can be managed and tracked throughout a delivery, and then at the end you've got something. We all know that. But when Agile is brought into place, software delivery is set up in an Agile way, but it's not necessarily, the landscape isn't prepared to receive that in the rest of the business. And depending on how the rest of the business needs to react to Agile, that can be quite disruptive. So the conditions required for Agile germination, as I've told them, as I've said, it often leads to a isolated ecosystem. So in order for Agile to actually work, you need to empower a team. You need to get all the right people into the right place to empower them to do what they think is right, to set their own prioritization, look at the way that they work, to feedback refinements to that process, and to grow as a team together. That sort of autonomy within an organization can often lead to it being a bubble. And we kind of use the term incubator as in a term outside of large business, but I've seen incubators within large businesses which essentially have an air gap between the Agile processes which are going on within it and the rest of the business, and have very clear demarcation between what rules apply within the incubator and then the rest of the traditional business. The perception of a proficient Agile team, and I think I alluded to it earlier on, may not necessarily be positive. So even if you've got an Agile team which is working in a very proficient way, it's going through the story points, it's developing continuous improvement, it's delivering features, it's asking for feedback, it's failing early, the external perception of that might not be that great. I think the really good example of this that I've seen in recent times is the DWP project, the one credit system, whereby the National Audit Office highlighted the millions of pounds which had been spent but not delivered anything, whereas actually we all know that the tens of millions that were spent in the inception of that project were all around learning and moving the project to the right approach to deliver what it needed to, rather than it being wasted. And the perception of that, the public perception of the DWP project, was not that that's a team which is orientated itself towards success, but the perception was that it's a team which is wasting money and not getting to what we need. And lastly, Agile as a process, whether it be Kanban or Scrum or anything in between, it exposes considerations that should have an external interface. So what I mean by that is that we do have kind of story points and bugs and A/B testing and all these things. All these things indicate that work is being done, that the project is moving on, lessons are being learned, learning is validated. And all these interfaces, all these aspects of Agile need to have an external interface. When people deliver on a waterfall project, you have a Gantt chart, you have percentage complete, you'll have documents which are signed off, they're approved and reviewed. My contention is that Agile delivery should have similar, not similar metrics, but certainly metrics that need a little bit of understanding, but can be published by projects and can be articulated that we are moving in the right direction, and these attributes represent good practice. So that's the gap that I perceive. Hopefully you agree. If you don't, I'm really, really interested in your thoughts on why I'm off. So the impact. So without a broad coupling, the effectiveness, and really I'm talking about the effectiveness of this integration down here, so the Agile provides and what the business needs. The interface is reliant on one or two people. It'll be a product owner or a scrum master who has to describe to a stakeholder or a business leader why 100 bugs this sprint is really, really good, that we're making good progress. They have to describe why having a deployment pipeline that only takes half an hour is a good thing, and they'll be going down to 25 minutes next sprint because they've identified learnings. And the challenge is that they can represent that thing. Are they articulating it in the right way? Is it going to be the same thing sprint after sprint? And are they articulating it to the right people within the business? So they've obviously got their stakeholders. The stakeholders are spending money, so they must be on board in some way, shape, or form. They see features that have been delivered. But what about the finance guys? What about the CFO who can just see money flowing out and no money flowing in perhaps? Are they addressing the compliance section of the corporation because they're developing new features, perhaps with personal data? Can he see any evidence that they're considering compliance? Perhaps not. And the metrics that I've talked about must kind of be reflected or presented to those parties within the business to address the fact that they don't have anything else to go on. They don't have any confidence factors. As illustrated, they grow frustrated. They're not going to necessarily back the project. And whilst the project might be delivering things, it'll be doing so under duress within the organization. They have to kind of wait until I know Agile is there to deliver value quickly, but actually the expectation of value is the whole thing probably. And people don't necessarily know when they're going to, or the magnitude of the value until it actually flows through. When you're preaching that a development approach needs to fail before it can deliver, where minimum viable products will go out to 1% of users and they won't necessarily see the whole game, which can't be defined, by the way, until X sprints down the line, it's not a great comfort factor for the people within the business with stakes in the project. The other thing is that the internal parties within the Scrum team, they don't necessarily know how their contribution maps onto the business value. So when you talk to a user experience architect, perhaps, he's all about doing small experiments, seeing what's right. Does he know how that then kind of maps or translates to the core business? How does he reflect what work he's been doing in the sprint to other people within the business, whether it be finance or legal or anybody else in between, around what they're contributing to the business, when expectations can be set, etc. So there's a point whereby that kind of isolation between the Agile team and the rest of the business kind of goes both ways. People can't see in and people can't articulate out what's going on. change propagation is impeded. Of course, if you've got kind of a big gap, then if the business imperatives change, how does that kind of flow into the Agile team? Now, we all know, well, it'll go via some product guys, it'll go to a product owner, and then it kind of gets through. But that's for very structured and formal feedback. What if things are slightly more nuanced? What if somebody needs to understand that a change in revenue predictions implies that the team needs to work differently, and that product owner isn't formally announced of it? With this very loose coupling and isolation between what's been delivered and what's the business imperative, change propagation is pretty difficult. And yeah, I think I've already implied this, but local perception of progress doesn't mirror the external. So you as a team might be growing and developing and pushing out features, squashing bugs, but it doesn't necessarily reflect the fact that within the business, you're not perceived as kind of hitting off any of the headline tasks that the business wants you to see, whether that be a capability or a percentage revenue or number of users, et cetera, et cetera. So these are the impacts of having what is not through design, but through necessity, two isolated systems. So conceptually, the bridge, these are kind of fairly high-level concepts, but communication is absolutely key. Links to epic stories and tickets must move beyond the team. So I think it's a kind of crying shame that big tools like Jira don't necessarily have a reflection of how these things kind of link into business goals. So there are various external to small-scale Scrum and Kanban tools or techniques which will give you your business imperatives, such as vMost, lean value trees, which has been proposed by ThoughtWorks. But those things don't necessarily map one-to-one. They will flow through, and it will inform the backlog, but the linkage is always missed, and it's always left to a product owner then to bridge that gap, and he usually has to do that in Excel or something like that. Again, kind of, I've alluded to this, we need to elevate the progress which has been made to the business in an accessible way. So not just within the team, not just within the technology community of a company, but throughout the business, they need to understand where they are on this road to delivery. And the key kind of thing here is that most things in the business, they kind of devolve down into a monetary figure, a revenue figure, and so many things within the Agile delivery process don't. And I think there just needs to be that metric gap bridged in some way. So coupling, ensure that the throughput is translated into business value. Sorry, I'm kind of precursing myself there. So everything which is done, every ticket which flows across the board, every bug which is identified and resolved needs to have some business value associated with it. And I know there's lots of approaches to doing that, story points and weighted short job first, which identifies value, but ultimately, does it resolve to a metric of value, a figure, which is communicable to the rest of the business? And the other thing is the friction within an Agile team needs to be communicated as business loss. So again, reducing friction within Agile is part of the course. It's something that frameworks are there to do. But that evolution needs to be reflected up to the rest of the business again as some sort of loss, which can then be managed going forward. So this is what my vision of the bridge materialized is. So communication is at the backbone of this, obviously. So I foresee a system, and I'm developing a system which doesn't seek to replace the delivery platforms, because I'm not interested in doing Kanban better or doing Scrum better or orchestrating these approaches. All I want to do is take that information and then make it accessible to people. I'm also a strong believer that there's a bit of a revolution kind of going on in interaction interfaces. So we are using Slack and Hangouts and even Skype in some cases to interact with teams. Bots are becoming far more prevalent within our working days. So what I want to do is kind of create a virtuous circle whereby delivery platforms will be polled to get the task-orientated, their story-orientated, and their epic-orientated data to create a view of that within the Neat platform, which can then have insights kind of farmed from it to present things in an intuitive and an insightful way. And I'm not looking just to kind of create a reporting interface. What I'm trying to do is create something which is adaptive and kind of motivational. So I'm looking to get more information out of events which may just pass people by. I'm trying to get more. I'm trying to present a better, lower barrier interface to get information into a system which would perhaps require you to kind of log into something differently or use an interface which isn't necessarily that appropriate because Jira doesn't set itself up in quite the right way for the way in which you wish to work, or you just want to give a one-line comment and you don't want to have to go through a search function and you want that to be prompted. So I'd like to leverage these kind of industry-leading platforms and then kind of create, as I say, a virtuous circle which will enable people to interact with Agile in a better way and provide metrics which present to the business that contribution and the friction which they're applying in a better way such that they can continue to deliver in a worthwhile fashion. Nobody's heckled me. I'm really, really pleased with that. So that is about 25 minutes or 20 minutes of overview of the idea. Cool.
To say, I'll definitely pursue Colin in the book. So